Hi, I'm Mara Lathrop, and welcome to Interviews at Undertown as part of the Port Townsend Film Festival. We are interviewing Ulrich Braun, who is here with his film Kiryawanda. And Ulrich, thanks for coming to Port Townsend.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So you've never been to Port Townsend before, probably, right?
Actually, I have been to Port Townsend before.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
when were you here before?
Well, the first time I came to Port Townsend was 2009 when I was working on the script for Kinyarwanda, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I was a graduate advisor up at Goddard College.
Yeah.
They have a campus at Fort Worden. So,
right.
Yeah. So I've been around the neighborhood.
And you're going to be doing some stuff with Goddard this week, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm going to be doing a seminar on how community helps, how filmmaking helps build community tomorrow with the graduate and undergraduate students at Goddard.
That's fantastic. Are you going to have them making any films for you?
I'm going to have them do a small little film exercise, a microfilm project during the session, yeah.
Oh, that sounds pretty interesting. Maybe somebody will submit a short to us next year from that. That would be cool.
I think you're going to probably get some really talented people coming out of that program who will transfer over into the Port Townsend Film Festival. Yeah.
So you started working on this script in 2009. That was 3 years ago. And how did the project? I mean, what was the inspiration for it? Where did the story come from, and how did you get involved with it?
Well, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa for 2 years, and when I left the Peace Corps, one of my buddies, Joshua Rod, there was another Peace Corps volunteer, he ended up going to Rwanda. Mm-hmm. And when he arrived in Rwanda, he met the film's executive producer, Ishmael Ntiabose. Ishmael was an aspiring filmmaker. At the time, he was driving taxi cabs, mm-hmm. and he wanted to tell the story about the Rwandan genocide. And Ishmael and I emailed for about 3 or 4 years, and in 2009, he told me he got a grant from the European Union to make a movie about the Muslim influence or impact on the genocide and how Christian and Muslims work together mm-hmm. to save lives. And he invited me over to Rwanda to be a consultant on the project. And then when I got there, I realized that they needed more than just consulting. The script was not that strong. They needed a script writer and a bunch of other things. And so it was being in Rwanda, hearing the multitude of stories, of experiences, tragic, beautiful, that happened during the genocide, that informed the way the script was written.
And so the script that existed before you got involved, that was just like out the window, or were there elements of it that have still remained and are still part of the film?
The beautiful core of that script was the priest and the imam, right. and how they worked together to save lives. But the script it had explosions and helicopters, and our production budget was only $250,000.
So no explosions.
Yes, and it was 40 pages. And so, from beginning to end. So it wasn't a really favorable length for any actual medium. And so the question for me, at the time I had 2 weeks to write a draft, and it was just a crazy schedule. How could I write a movie about these two men in this mosque? And I realized after one day that I couldn't. Mm-hmm. And so I used my weaknesses as a strength. I thought about it. I had made many short films right. prior to that, and I was successful at my short filmmaking. So I just took these stories that I was hearing from people in Rwanda and turned them into short films. And I wrote a short film every 2 days. And then I started to intertwine them, and that's how the structure.
How did one of the really lovely textural things in this film is getting to see a couple of events from several different perspectives as the stories unfold. Mm-hmm. Did you know that you were going to be doing that when you started writing it, or is that something that came to you as the writing developed, and how did you figure it out?
Well, first off, the process was very simple. I had a short period of time to put the script together, so I processed it like a Shakespearean sonnet, very structurally sound. Like I gave myself a box within the work. the movie's going to be about 100 minutes.
Right.
I knew that, right? And I knew I picked 6 stories that were going to be the core of the film.
18 minutes a story.
10 minutes a story.
10 minutes
a story.
Okay.
And then the last 30 minutes would be how everything is resolved and intertwined and everything is connected. And that's kind of how the movie actually flows. And so it was a very, a Shakespearean sonnet would be, 14 lines, 10 syllables per line. I was very structured in the approach. And so that was, I thought of that before approaching. I go back to emails now, and I was very specific to my cast and crew, even before I started writing, of how this thing was going to look and feel. And we were able to make that fit into that rubric, actually.
How is this project different from anything else you've ever done? I mean, I see that it's just a really, it's a piece of poetry. It's a tapestry. It's a lot of different things. What were the things about the script and then your direction that were new for you as an artist?
Well, this was my first feature-length film.
So that was new.
Right, that was extremely new. But so, in order to make it manageable, one of the things I teach when I teach directing is you have to give yourself a chance to succeed. And the idea of a feature film first time was overwhelming. I had written several bad scripts, in learning how to write
We all
scripts.
have many bad scripts in us.
Right, exactly.
And we must get them out.
You get them out of your system.
Right.
So with this project, I actually took all of my strengths as a teacher, as an educator, as a poet, like you said. The idea of the tapestry, a lot of my writing has a kind of a tapestry feel. I like to jump around in my writing. And even when I'm free writing, I'll get it out of my system and then I'll reorganize it and make it make sense. So this film was like the pinnacle of many of the other smaller projects or ideas that I had, and I just put them all in this particular project. But I think and even working with non-professional actors, I had done so much of that work in my short films that it was easier when I got to this one. But for me, the real difficulty here was the environment which I was working. We made the film in Rwanda. We had a very large crew, and we were dealing with life and death, and we were dealing with people's personal tragedies. And those things, I can complain about the weather, I can complain about equipment, but those are the things that were really the toughest part of the filmmaking. The simple moments, the little things of having an actor have to go to a place where they're remembering how they actually lost their parents.
What was really specific to Rwanda? Filmmaking is kind of filmmaking, right? But just getting the taste that I did of the culture and the way things work between people, it's very different than the United States. What new tricks did you have to learn as a director to get people to follow you and do things your way?
Well, fortunately, I lived and worked in West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer. So there were so there were cultural nuances and things, even going to East Africa, of working. There's a certain level of respect that whether I'm going to Kansas or Rwanda, you got to understand how things work in that place.
Absolutely.
So that you can get it done. You have to respect how people deal with one another. I also speak French fluently. And
that must have helped a lot.
And that helped a tremendous amount. I didn't have to have an intermediary, a translator, to translate for us. The other thing about Rwanda is such a beautiful place. It's really hard for a cinematographer to make Rwanda look bad, because everywhere you turn the camera, there's so much texture, so much light, so much life. So Rwanda was a beautiful backdrop for something beautiful. But I think the specific things that hurt us, or things that would hurt us in probably any third world country, and that's resources, electricity going out, not being consistent, going 3 countries away to get lighting equipment and getting them driven back, and one thing that was difficult. We had an amazing crew, but a lot of our crew we were taking a chance on because we had no reference for their resume and what they had done. Because you know, how do we know what people are going to do on this film? So there was a lot of trust, and I think that my skill and my gift as a filmmaker is trying to look into those people's eyes right away and find out who trusts me and who can I trust. So even if we make mistakes, even if we mess up, we're here for the film and we'll figure it out, we'll fix it, we'll find a way to make it better. And I think that's what got people to join us on the journey.
How was it for your actors, especially your principals? You know, that's some heavy material.
Yeah.
And I'm especially curious about some of your younger actors who don't remember maybe what happened.
Yeah, it was a difficult journey for the actors, actually. They came, it was as if like their lives was a rehearsal for this movie.
Wow.
You know, because once they got my material and they said my words, but they reinforced my words with their personal experiences.
Yeah.
And so by the time they started speaking my lines, they were putting things into it that I didn't even envision because it was their stories, you know.
Right.
And, you know, Edward, for example, Edward Bonporico, who plays the lead, like killer, the bad guy, who asks for forgiveness at the end of the film, he represents a part of the group that's blamed for the genocide. And he was a child during that incident. He was in the hospital when the fighting broke out, and he watched close to 50,000 people in the hospital that he was in get killed, bodies everywhere. And so when he gets in front of the camera and he is asking for forgiveness, he is asking for forgiveness for all the people that he saw get killed, and that's what each actor brought with them. You know, so it was a very so it was a heavy burden and a responsibility for all of us.
What ended up in the film that you didn't write, and that you had no idea that was going to be there, and you could not leave out?
You know, as a screenwriter, as an independent screenwriter, and this is not about my ego or anything like that, I am a slave to a script.
You are.
And I really, there's very little ad-libbing or deviation from what I write on the paper. I love it when an actor or someone can do something to take it to another level.
Right.
But Edward, because he watched those guys killing, he asked me, he came behind the camera and he said, Alric, what if I, you know, kissed my machete when I talked about killing somebody? Because he saw that when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And I said, do it, Edward. And there are little nuanced things like that that I didn't write into the script that he does, and it's so eerily...
It just says so much.
It says so much,
yeah.
You know, and I could have never written that because I didn't have the visual for that thing. The other thing is we're recreating a war without violence, really, without graphic violence, without any explosions, without squibs or fires or anything like that.
And you had a zero, and you obviously you had a stage blood budget. No, you didn't even have a blood budget.
No stage blood budget, no body budget, nothing like that. We did everything subliminally and with sound, and it was a very Alfred Hitchcock-esque approach to creating.
Well, you know, it really was, and I got to tell you that, you know, I knew I was going to watch a film about the war in Rwanda before I watched it, and I knew that probably wasn't going to be like an easy ride because of the subject matter. Right. And then, you know, when I was screening the film and I put it on, the first 15 minutes of that film before the first 15, it killed me. I really had trouble watching it. And then after, you know, after the first story unfolds and we're into the second story, I couldn't tear myself away. but the first 10, 15 minutes of the film were one of the hardest things I've ever sat through with a film. I want you, thank you. That was really, and there's no violence. There's just, you know, for me it was just what hadn't happened yet, and just this huge sense of dread that I had.
It's, I mean, you know, it's a Alfred Hitchcock device, you know, it's, you know, creating suspense and you know, getting people to feel that thing without having to, you know, see it. It's the shower scene from Psycho, you know.
I've never actually watched the shower scene from Psycho with my eyes open.
Yeah.
I've only watched it with my eyes closed.
Yeah,
sometimes with my fingers in my ears.
Right, and it was such a tame scene compared to what people do now, but it goes to show that the imagination is far more complex and scary than anything
we can show graphically.
You
Yeah,
know,
I
it's
agree.
really much more interesting. But because we did a subliminal war with
Right.
sounds and the implications
Suggestion
of the
and
suggestion of it,
suggestion,
right? I never wanted to show a wide shot because we couldn't see the bombs and explosions. So I really wanted to make my entire movie very tight. And then we got on this dirt road where refugees were walking, and my cinematographer, Danny Vecchione, says, "This is a great shot, Alaric. We can have the crowd walking." Because we had like a couple hundred extras that day on this winding road, and I'm just director. I said, "No, man, come on, no wide shots. You know, I don't want any wide shots." And you know, I just smacked myself because I usually never say never. And I looked in his camera, and I was like, "Okay,
All right, you should do that.
that's a pretty beautiful shot." And you know, and it was a beautiful shot.
It
I ended
was,
up
yeah.
using it twice in the film, but the reasoning was there. The reasoning was I didn't want to go too far out and have to show anything that was too pristine or whatever. But yeah.
Right. What's next for you?
What's next for me? I mean, what's bigger than the Port Townsend Film Festival?
Well,
I'm gonna retire now.
you know, it's like, you know,
I'm good.
yeah, you should
I'm
probably
good now.
move to
Yeah.
Port Townsend and
Just
come and hang
relax.
out at the coffee shop with the rest of us lowlifes.
Yeah, no. I'm working on a new feature film that I'm supposed to be directing in a few months actually, in my hometown in Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay.
It's an adaptation of a novel by another resident in my hometown. I'm writing a couple of new scripts, and you're gonna see a lot more of me in the months to come. I just finished doing an episode of Final Witness,
Yeah.
a new TV series for ABC that
Fabulous.
premiered in July. But I'm just kind of like getting my runner's stride right now.
Thanks for coming and talking to us, and thanks for coming to Port Townsend. And that is going to be a wrap for tonight.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot.
Thank you for having me. Peace.